Welcome to session 2 of solutions. Yesterday, apart from doing the groundwork required to understand the solutions, we have already defined solubility and classified solutions based on solubility, understood the units of solubility. Did some review exercise and learning exercise also. Now in this session, solubility of solid in liquid, liquid in liquid, gas in liquid. So in our syllabus, we have got solutions based on liquid as the solvent only. So solubility of solids, liquids and gases in any given liquid, how is it affected, what factors determine the extent of dissolution. All these things we are going to study today. So let us start off with solubility of solid in liquid. Solubility of solid in liquid. Now you please see. We will quickly in detail quickly and in detail going to understand all the factors that influence this, and there ends the story. But as a part of understanding the factors, many useful and technical aspects we will be learning on which your focus must be there. So the factors deciding the solubility of solid in liquid, not only that, any other, even liquid in liquid or gas in liquid. Number one is nature of solute and solvent. What kind of solute I am taking in terms of its interparticle forces. That's why the interparticle forces were discussed yesterday for you. So in terms of the chemical nature of the particles, what kind of solute, what kind of particles are solute and what kind of particles are solvent in terms of their polarity and other aspects, that will decide the solubility, number one. Number two, of course, the temperature. Temperature plays a major role in deciding solubility of a given solid in liquid, any solute in liquid for that matter. And number three, pressure, which in this case will be of course negligible. I'll mention that why. Now let us understand this aspect, nature of solute and solvent. Children, always remember there is a universal law of dissolution which I know you would have studied already in your first PUC. Like dissolves like. Means a polar solute will be soluble in a polar solvent. A non-polar solute will be soluble in a non-polar solvent. Like dissolves like. That is the major thing under nature of solute and solvent we need to understand. So polar solutes are soluble in polar solvents, non-polar solutes are soluble in non-polar solvents. Example, see, all the ionic compounds are polar. Now you take any ionic compound like sodium chloride, magnesium chloride, copper sulfate, etc. They will be nicely soluble in polar solvents like water. You know very well water is a universal polar solvent. So they will be highly soluble in polar solvents like water. Okay. Now if you take non-polar solids like iodine, iodine is a molecular solid, and you know very well electronegativity difference in iodine molecule will be 0 because both are iodine atoms. That's why it's a non-polar substance. It will be soluble in non-polar solvents like carbon disulfide, benzene, carbon tetrachloride, etc. So that is the first aspect of it, like dissolves like. Polar solutes are soluble in polar solvents, non-polar solutes are soluble in non-polar solvents. Okay. Now after we understood that polar solids are soluble in polar solvents and non-polar solids are soluble in non-polar solvents, among polar solids also there are two types. First category, which are ionic, they dissociate into ions in the solution. Second category, they are molecular, they cannot produce any ions in the solution. Now comes the question, how these ionic solids dissolve into water, how these non-ionic or molecular solids dissolve into water, what mechanism helps in the dissolution. After understanding that, we will be able to go to factors like temperature. Now, dissolution of ionic solids in water. Okay. Very important and certain very interesting technical aspects we are going to learn here. So pay a lot of focus and try to listen second time also if not followed, but ensure you understand it clearly. Okay, see here. Let me take sodium chloride only, the classic example. Say sodium chloride solid is dissolved into water. You know very well it becomes sodium cation aqueous and chloride anion aqueous. Yesterday I told you this process will be called as dissociation because they already exist as ions, but they were strongly attracted due to electrostatic forces. Now those forces are broken and they became independent. How exactly this happens and what factors influence this dissolution? Let us understand this very clearly. See here. Polar solvents are categorized by a very important property called dielectric constant. What is it? Dielectric constant, often denoted by capital K, and dielectric constant is the measure of capacity of solvent to separate charges. Measure of capacity of solvent to separate charges. Means polar solvents are capable of separating the charges, making them independent, break the electrostatic forces of attraction between them. Now, any solvent that has high dielectric constant is said to have high capacity to separate the charges. Now, please understand, water is, of course, you must have studied this in your first year chemical bonding chapter. Water is a solvent with highest value of dielectric constant, that is 81. The next second highest, which is ethyl alcohol, actually has a dielectric constant of just 35. Please understand the difference. So, water is called universal polar solvent for a reason. It has got highest dielectric constant, it has highest capacity to separate charges and dissolve the substances into it. Now, because of its high dielectric constant, water separates sodium cation and chloride anion. But still, they are charged particles. They do possess electrostatic forces of attraction between them, and anytime they would like to come closer, become solid and settle down, crystallize or precipitate from the solution. For that to not happen, water surrounds each of the cations and each of the anion. That is by the special force which I have explained you yesterday called ion dipole force. What exactly is this ion dipole force? Why does this happen? Please observe. Water is containing two OH bonds and oxygen being more electronegative carries partial negative charge and hydrogen being electropositive carries partial positive charge. So that way, if you see, one end of water is negatively charged, the other end of water is positively charged. So water is a polar covalent substance. Water molecules are polar covalent molecules, hence they are dipoles with a positive end and a negative end. Any molecule that is polar can be called as dipole because it has two ends, positive and negative end. Now, as soon as water separates these two charges, cation and anion, a set of water molecules surround the cation through its negative ends. You know, opposite charges attract each other. So, cation being positively charged is attracted through negative ends of water dipoles. Similarly, anion being negatively charged will be attracted through positive ends of the water dipoles. Likewise, soon after the charges are separated, soon after the ions are separated, a set of water molecules surround the cation through negative ends of the dipole, a set of water molecules surround the anion through positive ends of the dipole, such that they ensure that these ions do not combine again and crystallize out or precipitate out from the solution. Can be imagined from a typical Indian movie scenario where villain separates hero and heroine and ensures they won't meet again, so puts a set of goons around. So here the water is water, apart from separating the ions, putting a set of goons around each ion, that is hero and heroine, so that these guys won't meet up again. Now there are two phenomena involved here. One is that the existing attraction forces between the ions is being broken. Now the energy involved in that process is called lattice enthalpy. What do you call it? Lattice enthalpy. Now here there are two words for lattice enthalpy, that is lattice formation enthalpy and lattice dissociation enthalpy. And many a times you would have learnt in your first year. Yesterday also I was speaking slightly about it, and today also I will reiterate. See, bond formation is an exothermic process. Bond dissociation is an endothermic process. A quick recap of these things, because this is very important to be applied logically and understood rather than by hearting and memorizing it. Now you see, it has been observed that for 1 mole of hydrogen gas to become 2 moles of hydrogen atoms, which you call it as atomization, the process is called as atomization, the enthalpy change was found to be plus 433 kilojoules per mole. Now, what do you mean by enthalpy change being positive? The process is endothermic. Now, for bonds to be broken between hydrogen atoms and to make hydrogen atoms independent from each other, the energy is being absorbed. So, when bond is broken, when attractions are broken, energy has to be absorbed. Whereas, so if you take this process reverse, that is bond formation, if you take, then the enthalpy change will be minus 433 kilojoules per mole, which indicates that for two independent atoms, to bond with each other and become a molecule, the energy will be lost. Bond formation is an exothermic process, means when two species come closer and bond with each other, they have to lose energy and bond with each other. Like the friendship between you guys. See, if two of you have to become good friends, is it possible that both of you keep all your attitudes as such? Compromise is needed, right? So you lose a bit of your attitude, you make a little compromises, then friendship becomes stronger. So your energy has to reduce to become friends. Once you start showing up your energy, showing up your attitude, friendship will be automatically broken. So bond formation is an exothermic process. Energy has to be lost. Evidence is in this universe there are more molecules than independent atoms. In how many substances you see atom being the independent particle? Metals, metalloids and noble gases. Yesterday we discussed. Even among them, metals are very much ready to react with something else and form bonds. So it is only the noble gases in which they will be trying to exist as atoms always independently. So you understand that there are more molecules, less atoms. Now you know very well, and it's a very popular fact, that higher the energy, lesser the stability, or lower the energy, greater the stability. A less energetic species is more stable. From universe, from nature, it is evident that molecules are more stable. That means molecules are less energetic. Energy of the molecules is less than the energy of atoms. Now, molecules have less energy means when atoms combine to form molecules, they should lose energy. A practical evidence from the nature. Conclusion, I know I have deviated a bit, but why I deviated to explain this is, when any two species come closer and form bonds, the energy will be lost. It is an exothermic process. Whereas when bonded species have to be broken and made independent, energy will be absorbed, endothermic process. This is a these two are like very fundamental facts. One is that higher the energy, lesser the stability, lower the energy, greater the stability. Second fact is that bond formation is an exothermic process, energy will be released, and bond dissociation is an endothermic process, energy will be absorbed. These two are very fundamental facts using which we reason out or explain many aspects. That's why this should be clear, and even to understand certain aspects of solubility of ionic solids in water, you need to be very clear about this. Okay. Now back to our concept. See, as soon as you added the ionic solid to water because of its very high dielectric constant separated both the ions, and then through the opposite ends of its dipoles, water molecules surround both the ions so that the ions remain independent. This phenomenon is called solvation of ions for any polar solvent for that matter. But 90% cases we will be discussing water-based solutions, water being the solvent. So we can even use the word hydration of ions. Hydration of ions means particularly water molecules surrounding the ions. Solvation of ions means any solvent surrounding the ions. Now, see this sodium chloride solid becoming aqueous sodium cation and aqueous chloride anion represents the process of dissolution here. Simple. Because how much ever sodium chloride has dissolved, that will become ions, because salts are strong electrolytes. They ionize completely. They break into ions completely. So, sodium chloride solid becoming aqueous ions represents the dissolution. So, the enthalpy change associated with this process is called enthalpy of solution, delta H solution, I can say. Enthalpy of solution or delta H solution, you can say. Now this enthalpy of solution or delta H solution depends on two factors. Factor number one is, there are two things that should happen here. One is lattice dissociation should happen so that the ions become independent. Lattice dissociation should happen so that the ions become independent. Number two is solvation should happen so that ions will remain independent. For ions to become independent, their lattice has to be broken. By the way, what is lattice? You must have learnt in first year slightly. In this year solid state you will learn in detail. The three-dimensional close packing arrangement of particles according to a definite geometry or according to a definite pattern is called lattice. So three-dimensional close packing, that packed up strongly due to electrostatic forces. That lattice has to be broken first for the ions to become independent. Then for the ions to remain independent, solvation has to happen. Now you observe carefully. In lattice dissociation, what are we doing? The particles are closely packed. The ions are closely packed. We need to break the electrostatic. We means the water. Water needs to break the electrostatic forces between them and make the ions independent. For that, it needs to perform dissociation. Just now I told you, wherever there is association, energy will be released. Wherever there is dissociation, energy will be absorbed. So lattice dissociation will be an endothermic process. Because it is an endothermic process, lattice enthalpy delta HL will be positive. Lattice enthalpy delta HL will be positive. Now, solvation or hydration of ions, let me call it, because we are particularly talking about water. Hydration of ions, what is happening here? The opposite charges are attractive. Through its positively charged cation, the negatively charged end of dipole and positively charged ion are attracting each other. The positive end of dipole and negatively charged ion are attracting each other. So two oppositely charged species are coming closer. So this is a kind of association. Just now I told you, when particles come closer, energy will be released. So hydration of ions is an exothermic process. That's why enthalpy of hydration, which we show it like this, will be negative. Now children, enthalpy of solution is a combination of these two factors, lattice enthalpy plus enthalpy of hydration, or I call it hydration enthalpy. So, if a substance has to dissolve, lattice enthalpy, hydration enthalpy both contribute. Now tell me, which is an opposing factor, which is a supporting factor? See, if lattice enthalpy is high, energy required to break the lattice will be high, it will be difficult to break the lattice. So, larger positive value of lattice enthalpy will be an opposing factor. It doesn't support the dissolution. Whereas, if hydration enthalpy is larger, negative value, what do you mean by negative value of enthalpy? So much energy is released. Say, for example, there are two delta H values. Delta H1 is equal to minus 200 kilojoules. Delta H2 is equal to minus 400 kilojoules, let us say. Tell me, which one is releasing more energy? Please don't look at the negative sign there. Negative sign merely indicates so much energy is released. So here 200 kilojoules is released, here 400 kilojoules is released. Which is more exothermic? Second process, where 400 kilojoules of energy is released. So minus sign clearly indicates the energy is released. So during hydration, more the amount of energy is released, happier the process. Happily process is happening, that means it is happily separating and keeping the ions separated, dissolution is happening. That means hydration enthalpy is a supporting factor. So for dissolution to happen comfortably, positive value of enthalpy, lattice enthalpy must be low. Negative value of hydration enthalpy must be high, because this is an opposing factor for dissolution, this is a supporting factor for dissolution. Now, when you say enthalpy of solution is sum of lattice enthalpy and hydration enthalpy, and you want this to be larger, the negative value of hydration enthalpy to be larger for dissolution to happen, enthalpy of solution overall must be negative. Now you please understand. See, by lattice enthalpy we mean lattice dissociation enthalpy. So please understand. When lattice enthalpy is less than the hydration enthalpy, delta H solution will be negative. Overall, delta H solution will be negative and dissolution will happen happily. Okay. Second case, lattice enthalpy is equal to hydration enthalpy. That case, enthalpy of solution might come 0, still dissolution might happen. Lattice enthalpy is slightly greater than hydration enthalpy. Slightly greater, not too much. Then, due to other factors like the temperature in the surroundings and mechanical factors like you stir the solution and all, because of all these factors, though enthalpy of solution comes slightly positive, because lattice enthalpy is slightly larger, and enthalpy of solution comes slightly positive, even then dissolution can occur. Whereas when lattice enthalpy is much larger than the hydration enthalpy, then enthalpy of solution comes large positive value, then the dissolution does not occur. So to conclude, when an ionic solid is put into water, polar solvent like water, this polar solvent has to break the ions, make them independent, for which lattice enthalpy will be applicable, means so much energy will be required to be absorbed. More that absorbable amount of energy, difficult to break the lattice. Please understand that. Then to keep them separated, to make them remain separated, it has to perform hydration. Water dipoles have to surround the ions, and that is a negative value exothermic process. Now, when lattice enthalpy is smaller than hydration enthalpy, that is enthalpy of solution is negative, happily the salt dissolves. If lattice enthalpy is equal or slightly larger than hydration enthalpy, so that it becomes slightly positive, solution dissolution comes slightly positive, then still dissolution occurs. Whereas when lattice enthalpy is much larger than the hydration enthalpy, such that enthalpy of solution comes a largely positive value, then the dissolution does not occur. So, for an ionic solid to be soluble in a given polar solvent like water, enthalpy of solution must be slightly positive or negative. That is the basic requirement. After they are being soluble, say either we conclude that it is negative or slightly positive, so it is soluble. What factors further improve or decrease the solubility is like temperature is the main factor that further increases or decreases the solubility, which we will discuss. But to discuss the effect of temperature, first it must be soluble, right? You are not unfamiliar with this concept, by the way, children. All those salts which you call them sparingly soluble salts, silver chloride, cupric sulfide, ferric hydroxide, all those which form precipitates, barium sulfate, all these salts must be having a large positive value of enthalpy of solution, because their lattice enthalpy must be much larger than their hydration enthalpy. Is that clear? So please understand, such salts of course will be insoluble, no doubt. Among soluble salts, how temperature, what does it do? Whether it will further increase the solubility if you increase the temperature, or it will decrease the solubility, etc., we will be discussing next. But for it to be soluble, this is the basic criterion. Is that clear? As an illustration of what we learned just now, there is a simple question in learning exercise 2.4, where for a set of ionic solids, salts, their lattice enthalpies and hydration enthalpies are given. We need to find the enthalpy of solution and comment on the solubility of that particular salt. Let us do it. That will make the concept we have learned so far much clearer. Okay. See, for lithium chloride, he says lattice enthalpy is 833 kilojoules per mole, which is positive, of course it has to be, and hydration enthalpy is negative minus 883. Now, this plus this, when you do, minus 883 plus 833, that means enthalpy of solution comes out to be minus 50 kilojoules per mole, which is a good fair negative value. So it must be highly soluble. Lithium chloride must be highly soluble in water. Moving on. Sodium chloride 766 minus 770, so it must be minus 4 kilojoules per mole. Slightly negative, and you know very well sodium chloride is soluble in water. Then potassium chloride 690 minus 686, slightly positive value, plus 4 you are going to get here. Still, slight positive values of enthalpy of solution are not a harm. Still the salt is soluble, so you can say potassium chloride also is soluble in water. Now look at silver iodide. 835 is the lattice enthalpy and minus 520 is the hydration enthalpy. I told you, sparingly soluble salts, all the salts which form precipitates when they are formed, which are precipitated when they are formed, will be obviously having large enthalpy of solution, large positive value for enthalpy of solution, and such salts will be soluble, I said, right? You know very well silver iodide forms a bright yellow precipitate. Hence, you can notice 835 minus 520, you are going to get plus 315 kilojoules per mole. Plus 315 is large value, so you can confidently say it is insoluble in water. And you know practically that it forms a precipitate. Moving on, potassium iodide, 635 minus 610, slightly positive, plus 25 kilojoules per mole. So it must be slightly soluble, not highly soluble. At the same time, I can't say it is insoluble, it must be slightly soluble. Hope with this you are pretty clear with the concept of lattice enthalpy, hydration enthalpy influencing the dissolution of ionic solid in a given liquid. Polar solvent. Most commonly used solvent is water, of course. Okay. Before proceeding further, I would like to add a little more knowledge, not relevant to the topic exactly, but still little more knowledge to your ideas. That is, what decides hydration enthalpy values? Please understand, enthalpy of hydration is inversely proportional to the radius of the ion. Means, smaller the size of the ion, more will be the nuclear charge, you know very well. Greater nuclear charge ensures greater capacity to attract the dipoles. As a result, it can hydrate more extensively. Now, if you take the cations of 1A group, that is alkali metals, lithium cation, sodium cation, potassium cation, rubidium cation and cesium cation, you know very well the ionic radius increases down the group. You are absolutely correct, because down the group what is happening? Number of shells are increasing, screening effect is increasing, nuclear hold on the valence shell is decreasing. As a result, ionic radius has to increase, no doubt. But that is true when we are talking about the gaseous cations. Whereas, if I write lithium plus 1 aqueous, sodium plus 1 aqueous, potassium plus 1 aqueous, rubidium plus 1 aqueous and cesium plus 1 aqueous, and ask me the radius or size we are talking about now. Okay, and ask me which is the largest cation, I would give you the opposite trend. Reason? In its ionic state, original state, independent state, this is the smallest. Being the smallest, it attracts the water dipoles to the greatest extent. So, high extent of hydration will be highest for lithium cation. Because the extent of hydration is very high, it attracts more number of water molecules. Because it attracts more number of water molecules, it becomes the bulkiest cation among all. Now, if someone asks you what would be the ionic mobility order of these ions in the solution, tell me, which would have the fastest mobility? Cesium cation would have highest ionic mobility because it is hydrated to the lesser extent. While discussing during electrochemistry, while discussing the factors contributing to resistance of electrolytic conductors, I told you ion dipole attractions are also a factor. Solute-solvent interactions we called them. Yes or no? So here, solute-solvent interactions are highest for lithium cation, lowest for cesium cation. So this can exhibit more ionic mobility, hence this can do better conductance, exhibit better conductance compared to this one. Though this is the smallest ion in gaseous state, it is going to be the largest ion in aqueous state. This is something you need to additionally know about hydration enthalpy and cations versus their hydration enthalpy. And then, I don't know how many of you remember, I asked a question among lithium and potassium while I was teaching you electrochemical series during electrochemistry. I asked you, though potassium is having less ionization energy and potassium is more electropositive, how come lithium is the best reducing agent? The one which readily undergoes oxidation is a good reducing agent, right? Among these two, this undergoes oxidation more readily, right? But still, this is the best reducing agent. Why? The answer is same thing. See, reductions, oxidations, these redox reactions happen in aqueous solutions. So in aqueous solutions, when the process is happening, it's a combination of two processes. One is the atom losing electron and becoming a cation. The process is called ionization, you know very well, and enthalpy change associated with it is called ionization enthalpy, and this is positive. Then this is of course gaseous atom becoming gaseous cation. Then this gaseous cation getting up surrounded by water molecules and becoming a aqueous cation involves hydration, and enthalpy change associated is called hydration enthalpy, and this is going to be negative. And of course solid lithium becoming, before this, above this process to happen, solid lithium becoming lithium gaseous is sublimation, the process called sublimation, for which the enthalpy change associated is called enthalpy of sublimation, which is positive. Now you please observe. There are two processes which are positive and there is one process which is having enthalpy negative, and summation of these three decides whether it undergoes oxidation most readily in the solution or not, because the summation of this is nothing but lithium solid becoming a lithium plus 1 aqueous. So these three processes together convert a solid lithium atom to aqueous lithium cation. For this, the overall enthalpy change decides whether it can undergo, which can undergo oxidation more readily. And if you notice, for this, if this process is more negative, the overall oxidation happens more happily. That is, solid atom becoming aqueous ion becomes more happily. And in case of lithium and potassium, if you compare the same process, no doubt for potassium this is less positive. For lithium this is more positive. That means ionization for potassium it is more supporting, for lithium less supporting. Whereas here, because lithium is a small atom, its hydration enthalpy is so large that though this positive value is smaller for potassium, this negative value also will be smaller. So overall negative value will be larger for lithium than potassium. That's why lithium undergoes oxidation most readily in the solutions compared to potassium. That's why lithium is a better reducing agent than potassium. Understood now? So please understand, lithium being the strongest reducing agent is associated with the concept of higher hydration enthalpy than the other ions of the same group, which are supposed to have lower ionization energy. So oxidation is supposed to be more favorable for these ions, but still this is the best reducing agent. Why? Because the process happens in solutions, so hydration enthalpy also is the deciding factor, and this has the highest negative value of hydration enthalpy. Understood now? This was a little addition to your present knowledge so that you will be able to answer some analytical questions in entrance examinations. Okay? So let me remind you, we were discussing factors affecting solubility of solids and liquids. And we started off with the first factor, nature of solute, and told like dissolves like. Then polar solutes being soluble in polar solvents, then there are two types of polar solutes, ionic solids and molecular solids. Then how ionic solids are soluble in water, what factors influence that we have understood. Now when it comes to molecular solids being soluble in water, the major reason for molecular solids like urea, NH2, C double bond O, NH2. This is the structure of urea. Okay, this cannot ionize into ions in the solution. If it can ionize, no doubt, same process, hydration, dissociation, all these things will decide. But it cannot ionize in the solution. Similarly, you take glucose, C6H12O6, the exact structure of glucose you will learn in detail in biomolecules chapter. But for the time being, please remember, glucose contains an aldehyde group with hydroxyl groups on every carbon there. Like this. Similarly, sucrose which in general we call it as sugar, whose formula is C12H22O11, which is a disaccharide of glucose and fructose, of course. Likewise, all these solids which are molecular solids, though there is some polarity in terms of existence of polar covalent bonds in these molecules, they cannot undergo any ionization, they cannot produce ions in the solution. Then, how are those molecular solids soluble in water? Answer, due to their ability to form intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. Now you must be understanding why I took that revision of fundamentals in the previous session. So solubility aspects are decided by these, attraction forces and all. Now you see, there is water molecule, say, okay, where electronegative oxygen is causing electropositive hydrogen to be highly electropositive, that it will be able to attract the more electronegative atoms. And I told you already, intermolecular hydrogen bonding happens only when in a given molecule hydrogen is attached to fluorine or oxygen or nitrogen, right? Because these are the three most electronegative elements. On Pauling scale, its electronegativity is 4, its electronegativity is 3.5, its electronegativity is 3. No doubt chlorine's electronegativity also is 3 on Pauling scale, but still nitrogen has more electronegativity than chlorine because of its smaller size. So to exhibit intermolecular hydrogen bonding, hydrogen should be attached to an atom which is highly electronegative and has very small size, and that is satisfied by these three elements. Now there is water. Now you have dissolved urea, let us say. Then urea has a structure like this. Right. Now there is a more electronegative oxygen atom in its close vicinity to electropositive hydrogen of water, so that the electropositive hydrogen of water can involve in hydrogen bonding with electronegative oxygen of urea. As a result, urea will be able to form hydrogen bonds with water molecules. So what is happening? It is going and adjusting itself in the environment of water. There were already intermolecular hydrogen bonds between water molecules. It is going and offering, I am also forming intermolecular hydrogen bonds with you. Come on. Now, because it is able to form intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water, it is able to become miscible in water. So please understand, any substance which is not capable of forming ions in the solution is still soluble in water, then the reason must be its ability to form intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. Is that clear? So, like dissolves like, and ionic solids are soluble because of breaking of lattice and because of hydration, so that enthalpy of solution could be negative or slightly positive. Molecular solids are soluble in water because of their ability to form intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. That ends the effect of nature of solute and nature of solvent on dissolution or solubility of solid in liquid. Now let us go to effect of temperature, which is major part of it. Okay. If we need to talk about effect of temperature on solubility of solid in liquid, I need to classify the solids into two categories. Just now we discussed that the dissolution could be exothermic or the dissolution could be endothermic. And of course, we are keeping aside the categories in which dissolution is highly endothermic, enthalpy of solution is highly positive, like silver iodide we got in the learning exercise. In such cases, it is insoluble, question is no discussion there. If it is already insoluble, the temperature might slightly change its solubility, even that matters, I agree. So let us divide the solids into two categories: solids which have exothermic dissolution and solids which have endothermic dissolution. How temperature affects each one of them. Now, first category, solids with endothermic dissolution. Now, let me give you examples first. I know in that learning exercise, sodium chloride was coming slightly negative. but still things matter. There could be slight difference in the experimental values when given in literature. So sodium chloride also comes under endothermic dissolution. Then potassium chloride, sodium nitrate, potassium nitrate, potassium iodide, which you saw in that learning exercise. So all these salts, popular examples, exhibit endothermic dissolution. Okay. Then second category I would like to discuss here are solids with exothermic dissolution. Popular examples of solids with exothermic dissolution could be, lithium sulfate, cerium sulfate, where cerium is in its +3 oxidation state. So it is going to be Ce2SO4 taken thrice, cerium sulfate. Then calcium salts of few organic acids like calcium acetate, calcium propionate, etc. Then sodium carbonate decahydrate, Na2CO3, 10H2O. These are certain salts which are very popular for exothermic dissolution, that is exhibiting negative value of enthalpy of dissolution. Okay, now dissolution process can be represented like this: solid put into liquid and that becomes a solution. The forward process represents the dissolution. Then the backward process, of course, represents the crystallization, because solid is coming back from the solution. Now we understood that in this case the enthalpy of change of the dissolution is positive. Here also solid plus liquid, forward process dissolution, backward process crystallization, and it is becoming solution. And in this case we understood that enthalpy of such solution is negative. Now we are talking about effect of temperature on this dissolution, and this is when you start applying Le Chatelier principle. Assume the solution is already saturated, because at a given temperature you know that until it becomes saturated it dissolves. So say I was initially I prepared a solution at some 25 degrees Celsius, and so much of it was dissolved and it attained equilibrium, and you know very well in equilibrium rate of dissolution is equal to rate of crystallization, and that is when you call it saturated solution. Now I wanted to increase the solubility or decrease the solubility, whatever, so I am trying to change the temperature. Then what happens? To understand the effect of temperature on this process, we must first understand what happens internally with the system. Yesterday I told you while revising Le Chatelier principle, while applying Le Chatelier principle we should think two things. Number one, internally what is happening. Number two, externally what are we doing. So first understand internally what is happening. Then whatever we do externally, it goes in the direction opposite to nullify what we have done externally. Correct? So when the dissolution is endothermic, means understand that dissolution direction, in the direction of dissolution, temperature is decreasing. In the direction of crystallization, temperature is increasing. Why? This is internally in the system. Why? You know very well, endothermic process goes with absorption of energy, so system's temperature will decrease. In the direction of exothermic process, system's temperature will increase. So here forward is endothermic, so temperature is decreasing in forward direction. That means dissolution direction, temperature is decreasing. Here it will be opposite. Because forward process is endothermic, in dissolution direction temperature is increasing, in crystallization direction the temperature is decreasing. This is internally. Okay. Now from outside, externally, we are increasing the temperature. When you increase the temperature, the system or the equilibrium would like to shift in a direction where there is decrease in temperature. So when you increase temperature, it would like to decrease temperature. In which direction there is decrease in temperature? Dissolution. So when you increase temperature, dissolution also increases. When you decrease temperature, dissolution also decreases. So solubility of this category of salts which exhibit endothermic dissolution is directly proportional to the temperature. Coming back here, externally you are increasing the temperature. It would like to go in a direction there is decrease. Decrease is backward because here backward process is endothermic. So it would like to shift backwards. Shifting backwards means it is improving crystallization. That means dissolution decreases. Whereas externally when you decrease the temperature, dissolution increases because it would like to go in the forward direction where there is an increase in temperature. If you decrease, it would like to increase the temperature, so it goes forward. That means for those salts which exhibit exothermic dissolution, the solubility of the salt is inversely proportional to temperature. So for a salt which has endothermic dissolution, maintain higher temperature for better solubility. For a salt showing exothermic dissolution, maintain lower temperature for better solubility. That is the effect of temperature on solids. But it's not yet over. There is an unexpected third category here, that is the salts which show irregular variation with temperature. Why do they show irregular variation? What is the story? Let us understand directly taking examples. Let us understand first with the example of sodium sulfate decahydrate. See, this is basically a salt with endothermic dissolution. That means its solubility in solvent, liquid solvent or water is supposed to increase with temperature, no doubt. It keeps on increasing with temperature, and that is true up to a temperature of 32.8 degrees Celsius. Once it goes above 32.8 degrees Celsius, apart from dissolving in water, it undergoes a slight chemical change where it loses this water of crystallization and becomes anhydrous sodium sulfate. And unfortunately, anhydrous sodium sulfate has an exothermic dissolution. You can add that to the examples which I gave you, lithium sulfate, cerium sulfate, etc. So since anhydrous sodium sulfate has an exothermic dissolution beyond 32.8 degrees Celsius, if you further increase the temperature, what happens? The extent of dissolution goes on decreasing. So up to 32.8 degrees Celsius, you keep increasing the temperature, the solubility goes on increasing. After 32.8 degrees Celsius, because it is becoming anhydrous, further solubility is influenced by the behavior of sodium sulfate, not sodium sulfate decahydrate. And this exhibits an exothermic dissolution. That's why with increase in temperature, its extent of dissolution decreases. A similar example I can give you from green vitriol, ferrous sulfate heptahydrate. Up to a temperature of 61 degrees Celsius, you go on increasing the temperature, the dissolution goes on increasing, the extent of solubility goes on increasing. But once you reach this particular temperature, what happens? It is going to become anhydrous ferrous sulfate. And anhydrous ferrous sulfate exhibits exothermic dissolution. That's why further the extent of dissolution goes on decreasing with increase in temperature. Likewise, if you see, calcium chloride hexahydrate shows changes at 2 points. Initially, it becomes calcium chloride tetrahydrate, then becomes calcium chloride dihydrate. As a result, it is going to exhibit changes in variation of solubility at 2 different points. That's how the hydrate salts especially show irregular variation with change in temperature because of slight chemical changes happening with the changes in temperature. Okay. Now, if you go for drawing the graphs for showing variation like this, you can see, suppose, better I rub the board. So if you try and draw a graph for solubility in terms of number of grams of solute per 100 grams of solution, 100 grams of solvent versus temperature. Say solubility is varying at 20 units, suppose I write 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 and so on, and temperature also I take at the intervals of 20 degrees, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 and so on. Then salts like say sodium chloride, its solubility increases with temperature. Potassium chloride, its solubility increases with temperature. Potassium nitrate, initially it may have very low temperature, but exponentially its solubility, very low solubility at low temperature, but exponentially it increases with temperature. Similarly, sodium nitrate increases with temperature. Potassium iodide exponentially increases with temperature. Silver nitrate, at low temperature itself it has got very good solubility, and as temperature increases, further it increases exponentially. Whereas for lithium sulfate, you see the trend in the opposite direction. For cerium sulfate, Ca2SO4 taken thrice, you see the trend in the opposite direction. Whereas if I draw the same graphs, say for sodium sulfate decahydrate you are talking about, then you get a graph like this. Where does this change start happening? At a temperature of, I should have drawn the, of course, if you assume this is the scale, I should have drawn it a little below. So, where are you observing this peak? At a temperature of 32.8 degrees Celsius, where up to this it was sodium sulfate decahydrate. That's why its solubility was, its dissolution was endothermic. So solubility was increasing with temperature. Whereas later it is becoming anhydrous sodium sulfate whose dissolution is exothermic. So solubility decreases with temperature. Same way, the other one, up to a temperature of 61 degrees Celsius, it was ferrous sulfate heptahydrate, green vitriol, whose dissolution is endothermic in nature. After 61 degrees, it is anhydrous ferrous sulfate, whose dissolution is exothermic in nature. So, solubility increases, and after 61 degrees Celsius, solubility goes on decreasing. Likewise, if you take calcium chloride, you can notice three changes in the curves. Calcium chloride hexahydrate, calcium chloride tetrahydrate, and calcium chloride dihydrate. Likewise, these are the salts which show irregular variation of solubility with temperature. That is about the effect of temperature on the solubility of solids in liquids. Okay? Now to wind up solubility of solids in liquids, I need to discuss one more factor, that is effect of pressure, and in fact I need not discuss. Why? Both solids and liquids are highly incompressible. So because they are not compressible, there will be no effect of pressure on the solubility of a solid in liquid. I'll wind this up by giving one classic example. Suppose I am trying to dissolve sodium chloride in water. Yesterday we were discussing that at a temperature of 20 degrees Celsius, 36 grams is the solubility of sodium chloride in 100 grams of water, if you remember. Right? Now, at the same temperature, by changing the pressure, I want to improve the solubility. You don't believe me? It has been observed that this is true at 1 atmosphere. We live under normal atmospheric pressure, right? That is 1 atmosphere. At 1 atmosphere, 36 grams of sodium chloride was soluble in 100 grams of water. Now suppose from 1 atmosphere, I increase the pressure to 500 atmospheres, 500 times. It has been noticed that there is increase in solubility of sodium chloride in water only by some 2.3%, which is very negligible because attaining 500 atmospheres involves a lot of effort. That's why the effect of pressure is almost nil in dissolution of solids in liquids. Now, let me go to the second concept, dissolution of or solubility of solids in liquids is over. Now let us talk about solubility of liquids in liquids, which also doesn't take much time. I'm going to wind it up real quick. Dissolution of liquids in liquids. Again, the major aspect that influences dissolution of liquids in liquids is nature of solute and solvent. Again, that major aspect again goes with the universal principle of dissolution called like dissolves like. Means polar liquids are soluble in polar solvents, non-polar liquids are soluble in non-polar solvents. For example, you know very well ethanol is soluble in water. Why? Because it is able to form intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. Are you understanding? Similarly, other polar liquids, if you take, they are soluble in water because of either dipole forces are strong or because they are able to form intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. Whereas you take non-polar liquid, carbon tetrachloride, non-polar liquid, benzene, they are miscible in each other. Whereas benzene is not miscible in water, carbon tetrachloride is not miscible in water. Similarly, ethanol is not miscible in either carbon tetrachloride or benzene. When it comes to temperature, generally temperature tends to increase the dissolution if basically the nature of solute is supporting the dissolution in a given solvent. So, the major factor that decides dissolution of liquids in liquids is actually the polarity of solute as well as solvent. Polar liquids are soluble in polar solvents, non-polar liquids are soluble in non-polar solvents. Okay. Now, there is a simple learning exercise 2.5 to check our understanding of this universal principle of dissolution called like dissolves like. Two questions are given. Pause the video, try and answer them and get back for the answers. Okay. Now, I am starting my answers. Question number 1, he has given you 4 compounds and he is asking you arrange them in the increasing order of their solubility in the solvent called N-octane. Nice question. By the way, what are octanes? Octane and isooctane, N-octane and isooctane are the hydrocarbons present in petrol. So directly he is asking you dissolution in petrol. Okay, now concentrate here. See, N-octane you know very well is a non-polar substance. It's a hydrocarbon. Formula is C8H18. Absolutely non-polar, what holds them is London forces. Now, universal law of dissolution, like dissolves like. So, the non-polar substances from this category will be most soluble and most polar substance of this category will be least soluble. Have you got them? You are absolutely right. Most will be number 1 cyclohexane, least will be number 2. If I am going in the, oh sorry, he has asked you increasing order, so I should start with the least, right? So, least will be number 2, potassium chloride, and most will be number 1 cyclohexane. Reason? Cyclohexane is the most non-polar species among these because cyclohexane also is a hydrocarbon C6H12. So that will be most soluble, and potassium chloride is an ionic compound where there are cations and anions, the species with real charges. So this will be most polar will be least soluble in this. So least will be number 2. Now we should decide among the remaining. So among methanol and ethane nitrile, whichever will be less polar will be more soluble, more polar will be less soluble. You know very well OH bond is more polar than the CN bond. So, methanol will be less soluble. Why could I put 3? It's okay. 3 will be less soluble and 2 will be more soluble than 3 and 1 will be most soluble. So, what did I do here? 4 I should have written. Okay. So, cyclohexane being non-polar will be most soluble, highest. Then ethane nitrile being less polar will be more soluble than methanol. Methanol, which is less polar and not ionic, than potassium chloride will be more soluble than potassium chloride, and potassium chloride being ionic will be least soluble in the nonpolar solvent called N-octane. So the answer is 2 less than, 3 less than, 4 less than 1. Moving on to the second question. If water is given as a solvent, you are given 6 compounds here. Classify them into insoluble in water, partially soluble in water, highly soluble in water. Again, it must be a polar substance and it should be capable of either undergoing ionization in water or should be capable of forming intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. I repeat, a polar substance that might ionize in water or form ions in water, ionize or dissociate to forming ions in water. And number 2, polar substance capable of forming intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. If it is not satisfying any of these 2 conditions, it will be insoluble. Now remember, though it is satisfying either of these conditions, if it is having larger non-polar hydrocarbon moieties, larger non-polar hydrocarbon units, even solubility will be slightly less in water. Please remember that. Having said that, phenol, though contains OH group and is capable of forming intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water, it has got a large phenyl group which is C6H5. I mean hydrocarbon moiety with a large molecular mass. That's why phenol will be partially soluble in water. Though it must be soluble, it is partially soluble in water. Okay. Then toluene, absolutely non-polar. It's pure hydrocarbon. Doesn't have any polarity. Doesn't have any electronegative different atoms, differently electronegative atoms. That's why it will be absolutely insoluble in water. Okay. Then moving on, formic acid, HCOOH. It is an acid. It contains acidic hydrogen, forms ions in water, formate and H+. If it is forming ions, it will be highly soluble. So, highly soluble in water. Then, ethylene glycol. Observe here. 2,2-OH groups. Very good chance for forming intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. That's why this will also be highly soluble in water. Alcohols are generally soluble in water due to their ability to form intermolecular hydrogen bonds. And it is a diol containing 2,2-OH groups. So, extent of intermolecular hydrogen bonding will be better. Then, chloroform, CHCl3. Look at this. No doubt there is a possible polarity. Net dipole moment will be non-zero. So, no doubt this will be a polar molecule. Though it is a polar molecule, neither it can ionize in water nor it can form intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water, because hydrogen is bonded to carbon here, neither to oxygen nor to nitrogen nor to fluorine. Because it is bonded to carbon here, it cannot form intermolecular hydrogen bonds, number 1. Number 2, it cannot ionize also in water. That's why chloroform will be insoluble in water. Then pentanol. No doubt pentanol must be capable of dissolving in water because of ability of OH2 group to form intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water, no doubt. But as I already told you, when non-polar hydrocarbon moiety is larger, non-polar hydrocarbon radical is larger, solubility will be slightly lesser. That's why pentanol will be partially soluble in water. So I quickly repeat, phenol is partially soluble because though OH group can form intermolecular hydrogen bonds, hydrocarbon radical is larger. Toluene is insoluble because it's absolutely non-polar. Formic acid is highly soluble because it can form ions in water. Ethylene glycol is highly soluble because it can form intermolecular hydrogen bonds nicely with water. Chloroform is insoluble because it can neither ionize nor it can form intermolecular hydrogen bonds. Pentanol partially soluble because though OH group is capable of forming intermolecular hydrogen bonds, hydrocarbon radical is large. That is your learning exercise 2.5 that gives you some insights into like dissolves like, whether you understood like dissolves like really or not. Okay, if you could answer correctly before me, be happy you have understood like dissolves like. If not, revise it once. Now let's move on to the last aspect of this discussion, that is solubility of gases in liquid. Of course, this may not be finished in this session, however. While talking about solubility of gases in liquids also, number one, we'll be talking about nature of solute and solvent. Number two, we will be talking about the effect of temperature. And number three, we will be in detail talking about effect of pressure. Why? When I was discussing dissolution of solid in liquid or liquid in liquid, both solids and liquids are highly incompressible, so pressure has no effect on that. Whereas here we are talking about dissolving gas in a liquid. So obviously gases are highly compressible. So pressure does influence the solubility. That's why the lengthiest discussion of this topic will be effect of pressure on the dissolution of gas in liquid. So let us finish the first two. Okay. As mentioned already, like dissolves like applies here also. So the polar gases will be more soluble in water. Non-polar gases will be soluble in other liquids generally. But generally, let us talk about polar gases. See, HCl is a gas at room temperature, you know very well. As soon as I write HCl, you may tend to call it hydrochloric acid, but aqueous solution of hydrochloric acid is the acid. Pure HCl is not acid. So please remember, hydrochloric acid is a mixture, not a pure substance. Hydrogen chloride, the pure substance, is actually a gas. And 1 volume of HCl can dissolve in 1000 volumes of water. Highly soluble. That is why you are able to prepare highly concentrated hydrochloric acid solution. Similarly, ammonia is a gas at room temperature, but very popular substance in the reagents, very popular substance in the laboratory is liquor ammonia, which is otherwise ammonium hydroxide, because 1 volume of ammonia can dissolve, I wrote it a little reverse. Let me correct myself. 1 volume of water can dissolve 1000 volumes of HCl gas. Similarly, 1 volume of water can dissolve 1000 volumes of ammonia. Means in 1 liter of water I can dissolve 1000 liters of HCl. In 1 liter of water I can dissolve 1000 liters of ammonia. Why? HCl is so highly soluble in water because it ionizes into H plus and Cl minus in water. So when HCl gas is dissolved in water, it becomes H plus aqueous and Cl minus aqueous. Similarly, ammonia is so highly soluble in water because ammonia is capable of forming intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. So, 3 things. Number 1, if the gas is capable of ionizing in water, or number 2, if the gas is capable of forming intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water, or number 3, if the gas has any reaction with water. Of course, if it reacts, obviously it is forming some other compound, so it will obviously dissolve. That's a different story, and that is a chemical phenomenon. But dissolution is generally a physical phenomenon without the chemical nature of substance being altered. If it is highly soluble, then either it might have ionized in water or it might have formed intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water. So any gases which are capable of either of these two processes will be highly soluble in water. That is what nature of solute influencing dissolution of gas in liquid. Coming to effect of temperature. See, while I was discussing effect of temperature on dissolution of solid in liquid, I was categorizing the solids into 2 categories. The ones having exothermic dissolution, the ones having endothermic dissolution. Remember? Whereas gas dissolving in liquid and forming a solution, forward process will be dissolution and the backward process will be liberation of the gas. Yes or no? So gas is coming out of solution, that means liberation, right? By the way, there is not much to discuss here because all the gases exhibit exothermic dissolution in liquids. I repeat, all the gases exhibit exothermic dissolution in liquids, especially in water. Now apply Le Chatelier principle. Because they are exhibiting the exothermic dissolution, the forward process dissolution involves increase in temperature internally in the system. The forward process involves increase in temperature, and the backward process, liberation of gas, that is loss of solubility, involves decrease in temperature. Now, externally, if we increase temperature, what happens? Equilibrium would like to shift to a direction where there is a decrease in temperature. And which process is decrease? The backward process is decrease in temperature. That's why if you increase the temperature, dissolution of gas decreases. So conclusion, solubility of gas in liquid is inversely proportional to temperature. So if you want a gas to be nicely dissolved in liquid, you maintain low temperature. One very popular instance that you know is when there is a shallow pond, the pond is not having too much of depth. During summers, you can notice lot of fish dying and coming to the shores. And you can see dead fish at the shores during summers, especially in shallow ponds. Reason? Because of high temperature during summers, the extent of dissolution of oxygen in water decreases. How are fish surviving? Using the dissolved oxygen only, right? Because the dissolved oxygen quantity decreases during summers, the fish are unable to breathe, hence they die. So that is a classic example telling you if you increase the temperature, the solubility of gas in liquid decreases. Another very simple and popular example I'll give you, try to think towards it. I have a cool drink bottle, say Sprite. I have a Sprite bottle refrigerated for a long time, maybe 1 or 2 days, very cold. And I have a Sprite bottle at room temperature, kept in the crate. Now, I open the lid and shake both of these. Which one gives more effervescence? First answer in your mind, then I'll give you the answer. Which one gives more effervescence? You are absolutely right. I don't know what you have answered, but I feel you have answered right. The right answer is the one refrigerated for a long time gives more effervescence than the non-refrigerated one. Why? Same reason. The one at low temperature was having more CO2 in dissolved state. The one kept at high temperature is having less CO2 in dissolved state. Why effervescence comes? After you shake, the pressure is released, the dissolved CO2 is coming out, right? If more CO2 is in dissolved state, if it comes out, more effervescence it gives. So the one at refrigerated will be having more CO2 in dissolved state because lower the temperature, more the solubility. That's why it gives more effervescence than the one that was kept at room temperature. Understood? So the gases which ionize, the gases which form intermolecular hydrogen bonds with water dissolve nicely in water. Then number 2, lower the temperature, more the solubility of gas in water. Number 3, what about the effect of pressure? The effect of pressure can be quantitatively understood from a very famous law called Henry's law, which we will be discussing in the next session. So in this session, we started off with effect of solubility of solids in liquids, and we understood effect of nature of solute at length, wherein we understood lattice enthalpy, hydration enthalpy, and solution enthalpy in general. Then we understood effect of temperature, then categorized the solids into 3 categories: the ones with exothermic dissolution, the ones with endothermic dissolution, and the ones showing irregular variation. Then we understood that effect of pressure is nil. Then we quickly passed through dissolution of liquids in liquids, in which we understood that like dissolves like is the major factor, and we did an exercise also to understand it. Then we proceeded to understand dissolution of gas in liquid, in which 2 factors we have understood: nature of solute and temperature. The third factor, pressure, we will be understanding in the next session. Okay, please revise the concepts nicely from EPL as well as from any reference book or textbook that you have with you. learn the things along with the sessions so that your knowledge becomes better and you will be able to answer weekend tests more confidently. Ultimately, you know very well, it is the marks that we score that build confidence as well as interest in studying. And if confidence and interest is built, automatically you will improve in studies. All the best.